Good evening. My name is Glenn Melson, and I am chairman of the Neighborhood Safety Commission. Tonight, I'm filling in for Trish Steiner, and we're having our monthly awareness on mental health awareness tonight. I'd like to welcome you, all the audience here in the Board of Commissioners meeting room, as well as those on TV. Our moderator tonight will be Joel Cope. Joel is an attorney with experience in trial law. He's a member of the Neighborhood Safety Commission as well as president of the Mableton Improvement Coalition. If you have any questions tonight, please follow our instructions on the website. We're glad you're here. We want to welcome our panel.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Glenn. As he said, my name is Joel Cope, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's conversation. And I think it'll be a very informative panel. We are having the topic about mental health awareness, and we want to thank our members of the panel already because they obviously have taken time out of their personal lives to be here and share their experience, both personally and professionally, with us. As you heard from Glenn, we have a live audience here behind me. As well, we have folks who are watching us on TV 23, Cobb TV, and we have folks who are also watching online. In addition, there is a web page on the county's website which has a listing you can click on, and it goes to past topics we've covered, and you also have the ability to send in questions by way of email that we can receive as part of our conversation. So we appreciate those folks who are here with us tonight physically, but also those folks who are out there in TV land and watching us online, because we appreciate your interest in this topic. We're very fortunate we have several distinguished panelists with us, and I'll read them off in no particular order. We've got Lieutenant Anthony Leo with the Cobb County Police Department. We have Beth Sanders, who is the president of Nami Northside affiliate and also a parent. And we also have Assistant District Attorney John Persley, who's with us this evening. And a little bit later on, we'll have the Honorable Judge Mary Staley Clark, who'll be joining us for part of this conversation. So I think it'll be a great panel we've got here tonight. What I'd like to do is basically sort of start off and give our panelists a chance to have a brief sort of description about their background, who they are. And then, of course, after that point, then we'll have some questions we'll be posing to our panelists. We do try to have all the questions being asked that all of you can respond to. So please don't be bashful just because somebody else spoke about it. All three of you are welcome to comment on every single question that we are going to pose tonight. So I'll start with you first, Lieutenant Leo.
Sure, I'm Lieutenant Anthony Leo of the Cobb County Department of Public Safety Training Unit. I train all new incoming recruits as well as incumbent officers. I'm also heavily involved in starting the CIT program within the Cobb County Police Department.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Sanders.
Hi, I'm Beth Sanders, and I'm president of Nami Northside Atlanta. And I serve in that role after first being served by Nami and now wanting to give back as a parent of two children who suffer with mental illness.
All right, thank you. Mr. Persley.
Hi, I'm John Persley. I'm an assistant district attorney with the Cobb County District Attorney's Office. I work for District Attorney Vic Reynolds. I've been a prosecutor since about 1994 with a brief stint in private practice. But right now I'm the accountability court prosecutor for Cobb County Adult Accountability Courts.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Oh, we're very succinct. All right, well, let's just go over a few terms tonight so people can be on the same page. The first is, what is the proper term to use to refer to someone who has a mental health diagnosis? Is it peer, is it consumer, or some other term that I've not yet mentioned?
Honestly and truthfully, it's hard to say exactly what mentally anyone with a mental illness, they want to be called different things, and there's so many different mental illnesses with the CIT program. We deal with everything from PTSD to schizophrenia to co-occurring disorders. So it's really kind of hard to put any label. Consumers is one that's very common right now. So I believe consumers would be the way to go with that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I first started hearing of people with a mental health diagnosis referred to as peers, and more recently it has become consumers. However, I will say that in speaking with a consumer who told me that he did not like that name because he didn't buy his illness, he preferred not to be considered a consumer. So I think we hear it both ways. And finding a way that feels most dignified for those that suffer, I think that's a challenge right now. But I personally prefer peer of the two.
Okay, all right, great.
In my world, I am the prosecutor in our mental health court here in Cobb County. And we refer, and you'll probably hear me refer to people as participants because they're participants in our mental health court program or our drug treatment court program or our Veterans Accountability and Treatment Court program. So I usually don't use either one of those terms. You'll probably hear me say the word participant tonight because they are participants in our program.
Okay, all right. And when we talk about mental health or mental health diagnosis, can you kind of tell us what sort of things does that encompass? Because people might think it's got to be super severe to be qualified as mental illness, and some people might think it's something else. Can you help share for our audience what kind of conditions would fall into that label?
I think that mental health conditions and diagnosis encompass both developmental disabilities and illnesses that affect one's thinking and one's behavior. So I really think it's a broad spectrum as far as an Axis 1 illness, for example. Bipolar or schizophrenia, the way that they are manifested is similar to as far as in the effects to the person is similar to depression or any other diagnosis, but I think it really encompasses a very broad spectrum.
Okay. Any other panelists?
And I think that's just it. You say someone's autistic, the spectrum is so large. What do they have? Is it more of Asperger's, or is it where they're non-conversant whatsoever, or are they highly functioning? So it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what we're talking about. And then there's schizophrenia, mood disorders, PTSD. So it's very encompassing. It makes it very difficult to label it in one way or the other.
Okay. Sometimes people say, "Hey, listen, I just have depression. I get sad. I can't get out of bed for a couple of days. I don't have a mental illness. I just have depression. That's all." So, what would you say to those people who are watching this program?
Honestly, I would say get help immediately, because small little bits of depression add into larger bits of depression and are more difficult to I say solve or rectify down the road. If you have a little bit of an issue, get help as soon as you can.
Okay. All right.
I would
Proceed.
also encourage that person not to feel ashamed of it. It is not a character flaw. It is truly a chemical imbalance, an illness that they didn't choose to have. So please don't feel ashamed about seeking help. And I think the more that we talk about it, the quicker that we do seek help, the faster that we can eradicate stigma.
Okay. Mr. Percy, anything you want to add to that?
I agree with the lieutenant that anybody who is in that situation needs to get help. I would say also that everybody can get sad, but if you're, in your example, if you're so sad that you can't get out of bed, or you can't get dressed, or you can't take care of yourself, then you need to seek help immediately. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, just in the last couple of minutes, we've been very fortunate to be joined by Her Honor, Judge Mary Staley Clark. And if you wouldn't mind, Your Honor, just share with us a little bit about you and the circuit that you're in and sort of your connection to the accountability courts and so forth. But again, we're very fortunate you're here with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was late. I actually was sitting with the jury, and they were out till 7
Oh,
trying to
goodness.
come up with a verdict, or else I would have been here on time, and I apologize.
No worries. Well, hopefully they were successful in doing so.
No.
Oh, no.
They're coming back in the morning. It's not simple what they're trying to resolve. They're working very, very hard at it.
Okay.
I'm Mary Staley Clark. I'm a judge in the Superior Court of Cobb County. I've been a judge either in state court or Superior Court since 1982. Accountability courts sort of came online in Cobb County about 14 years ago with the drug court. And I was fortunate that Judge Krieger, who was the judicial officer on that court, asked me to back him up. So when he had things that he needed to do or take a little time off, then I did the drug court until in about 5 years ago, we were able to start the mental health court. And I don't mean to be immodest, but I was one of the leaders in doing that. I had a passionate feeling about the fact that this community needed that amenity. We had other things. We had drug court. We had all the juvenile court accountability courts. We didn't have a mental health court. And in a community as large as this, our citizens needed and deserved that opportunity to have those sorts of cases resolved with an accountability court. We brought together a pretty fabulous team. Mr. Percy's part of it. Police department is super supportive. The sheriff is also, and so it's been on board for 5 years.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think just a second ago, I think Ms. Sanders was touching on a great idea, which is that one of the challenges to people getting treatment is the stigma associated with it, and that people have a variety of negative thoughts about that. Tell us what are from what you've experienced, what you've heard, what are the stigmas that you hear about that are barriers to people seeking proper care, proper treatment? And how maybe you individually try to kind of work with those things to where we kind of break down those barriers.
Well, as I mentioned before, I think that oftentimes people are filled with shame, which I think is really because we have not educated our society well. But it's has been historically thought of as a character flaw and something that people can choose to come out of. And so I think that's one of the things, and that as we educate our society on what mental health conditions are, hopefully those stigmas will be eradicated. And I also think that it's just very difficult to find access to the services that people need because they're cost prohibitive in so many cases. So I'm not sure if I answered your
No,
question
you did
completely.
very much. Thank you. Other panelists like to join in, add to
One
that?
of the things, especially with law enforcement, we have PTSD, but it's more of a cumulative PTSD as opposed to being in combat for 2 or 3 years. You spend 30 years with stress, and we don't seek help as law enforcement officers because of the stigma. I don't want to be weak. I don't have a problem. I can get through this. I can self-medicate. Maybe I'll just have a couple of glasses of bourbon when I get home. Maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that, as opposed to going to get help. And the county's been excellent at implementing peer programs to help law enforcement officers, especially when they come into contact with a situation that, with kids, anything that happens with a kid or any type of death or a very bad car wreck. We have peer support that will come out and talk to the officer just to make sure that they're okay. And in the past, we didn't do that. We're tough. We don't need help. So there is a huge stigma, especially in law enforcement officers, to do self-care, to take care of themselves.
Well, also, too, I think one of the things I've heard about this condition, too, is that the loved ones of the person with a diagnosis are feeling incredibly lonely and isolated in connection to these kind of stigmas. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why that would be so?
Well, as a family member, I think that it's because, first of all, that family member doesn't really know what they're dealing with in many cases. In my case, one of my cases, our loved one became ill when she was in college and at the prime of her life, and out of nowhere. And we had no idea what we were dealing with. And as we went through trying to get treatment and fix her problem, we were encountered by many different opinions, and very well-meaning people who didn't necessarily realize that it was an illness, but thought, if we had better parenting skills or if we, tried another thing, then maybe it would solve the problem. But as we went through the process of educating ourselves, it became clear, that it's a mental illness, and we continued on that journey.
Okay. All right. Also, I've heard some people think that, well, if you have a mental illness, you're not really bright. You're kind of just a little slow, not really very, not very intelligent. You're not going to do well in school. You just don't have a lot going on. Is that true? Not true?
I have an opinion there. I know from us reading and paying attention, people with schizophrenia tend to be very high-ordered, high level of intellect. You're talking about very, very smart people that have schizophrenia. It's the unusual schizophrenic that isn't way up there on the intellect scale. They're very, very bright people.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on in their heads that's keeping them from having what we would consider to be a normal life. But no, there's a lot of intellect there. And in the other conditions, bipolar, I'd be very surprised if almost everybody doesn't know a bipolar person and they're of average intellect or more or better. So low intellect does not go hand in glove with mental illness. In fact, in many cases, in my opinion, higher ordered intellectual functioning is a key component, is there with a person who has schizophrenia, a person who's bipolar, the other disorders. It's other things that are causing the problems. Some of it is organic within the person. Some of it is years and years of abuse, sexual or physical abuse as a child. It commonly causes personality disorders and psychological disorders. And those things are not a function of intellect.
Well, Your Honor, you'd made a great point a minute ago about sort of the identifying the need for the mental health courts here in Cobb and distinguished from other accountability courts. What were the things that you were seeing and hearing and experiencing that brought you to the opinion, this is something new we need to start that makes it different from the other accountability courts?
Well, first of all, they were happening all over the state, and Georgia's at the forefront of the nation, really, with these accountability courts. But all over the state, you were starting to see the accountability courts blossom and grow and do good things to help people be pro-social rather than antisocial. And we didn't have a mental health court here, and it made no sense to me that in a large metro community, we didn't have one when other people did. What I have seen and what interested me in the idea of it is I've been a judge a long time, and I started out with misdemeanors. And so you would see the same shoplifter and the same shoplifter and the same shoplifter and the same person and the same family. And you're going, this isn't a person that just sort of, picks up something because, they see it and they're a kid and they're learning to grow up. This is a chronic condition within their family or their personality, and nothing's being done that is good for society. It protects society. We just put them in jail. You can't put them in jail for long, and then they go back out and reoffend. That never made any sense to me. It didn't seem that it put public safety at the forefront, and then it didn't seem to me it took care of the victim, and it didn't seem to me that it did anything for the defendant. When you get into felony court, you see other things. You see the person with the mental health disorder who's been overly sheltered in a home, maybe never had any outlet to go out and have a job or finish an education, and they explode at home in an aggressive and violent way, and that's what we see a lot of. You've got a family saying they're sick. They didn't mean to hurt me. A mother will say, I didn't mean to hurt me, but I judge I'm going to put them in jail for 10 or 20 years, and that never made sense to me either. Of course, it depends on what you do, and I think John personally would be good to speak on this point as well.
Yeah, I've been involved, interested in mental health court specifically, and that was one of the things that got me wanting to be involved in accountability courts, because I've tried cases, I've been involved in cases where a person has committed a crime, and the only real explanation was some sort of mental illness. And before accountability courts, our options were very, very limited as to what we could do in the criminal justice system with people who had mental illness. I tried a case several years ago, and it was somewhat of a violent offense, but the person had escaped from a halfway house. I mean, she had a mental illness, and she ended up going to prison for a little while. That was before we had accountability courts, and I think now there's a good chance that particular person would have ended up in our mental health court. So I agree with Judge Staley on that, and there was a huge need. The criminal justice system just, in my opinion, maybe my sole opinion on this, but the criminal justice system has never done mental health well until now. I mean, we're starting to understand it. We're starting to look at the things that drive the mental illness, but like Judge Staley said, the things that go along with that, whether it be family issues, a lot of times substance abuse issues can go along with those things too. And we're starting to try to change behavior, change the thinking of those people.
I think it might be fair to say it appealed to our sense of justice,
Yes.
that there was a
Yeah.
gap, and we weren't serving the community, and we weren't serving citizens, people, well, and that this was something that could come in and better serve human beings and families in our community and make our community safe. I think
Okay.
it just goes to justice, our sense of justice.
Okay, well, thank you, thank you. Now, another thing you hear people say is, well, mental illness only affects a really small number of people, just a really tiny number, just kind of people are off the margins of society. Is that true or false?
False. 1 in 5 people in society have a mental health condition. 1 in 4 children.
Wow, so basically, if you four were children, it'd be one of you who would have a mental health condition.
I think it's safe to say that we all either have a loved one or know someone who has a mental health condition.
Oh, that's a very high number. Wow. Now, another thing that you hear, and I think Mr. Persley touched on this too, is about the idea of people who have a mental health diagnosis being scary or violent or frightening, that we should kind of fear them or kind of cower away from them. Is that a fair stereotype or a fair belief?
I believe it is. When you hear schizophrenia, you think of a horror movie and somebody acting out in a very violent manner, and I've run into several who are not like that. They strive to live a life every day, and they try to do as well as they can every day, and they try to take their medication, and they try to be as productive as they can be. But that's not what you think of the first time you hear that, or when you do hear that word. So I believe there's a stigma to certain, more so to some disorders than others.
I think factually, there may be a modicum of truth for a person who's not properly medicated, who's in a stressful situation, and that's one way that they act out, or when they have their first psychotic break. You can see violence and things of that. And then, of course, that's what's within the popular knowledge, because that's what's going to be on TV or in the news. And so that's what your average person out there is going to see. And if they do know someone who's mentally ill, they haven't seen that behavior. And so then they put that into, oh, that's what goes into the mind. This is what happens with this person. And there is fear. And when I was starting the court, I remember talking to a person who was to be helpful and was very, very helpful in starting the court. But what they said to me was, do you really want to do this? Aren't you afraid? And I thought, why would I be afraid in a courtroom of anybody? That's what the deputy's for. I'm the safest person on the planet, you know? So that shocked me, but I thought, aha, this is how many, many people are going to perceive our court. And that armed me well when I had to advocate for it, to say, we're going to make these people safer for society, because we will be monitoring their drug usage. We'll be monitoring their proper medication usage. We will be making sure they're getting proper treatment. We'll know they're in a safe home. We'll know they have a job or in school, and we'll deal with their family issues. And it gave me such a brilliant thought of how to sell it that I hadn't even thought of, that we're going to make society safer for folks that might pose a danger.
Okay. Ms. Sanders, I think you were going to say something.
Well, yes, I will add to that I read a statistic recently that stated that only 3% of violent crimes are committed by people who have mental health conditions, and that people with a mental health condition are much more likely to be victimized than actually perpetrate. So,
And what's the thought process behind why they would more likely be victimized?
in my thought, because they're much more vulnerable. They don't. If a person is manic, they do not realize their vulnerability. They always or they will put themselves in risky situations. There are just a whole lot of things that happen when somebody is unstable, and it does put them at risk.
Okay. I think one of you also mentioned the term dual diagnosis. What does that mean in the context of mental illness or mental health diagnosis?
I think we commonly think of it as somebody who has an addiction as well as a diagnosis of a mental health condition.
Well, I was going to say a substance abuse problem or issue and a mental health issue, and not always, but very often, those things go hand in hand. You have people, Lieutenant mentioned it, people with mental illness will often self-medicate with drugs or alcohol, and then that becomes a serious issue that affects their daily life.
So what you're saying is the diagnosis is there first, and then the alcohol or drugs come in behind that.
Not always.
Not always,
Okay.
but often.
Use of certain drugs can trigger, particularly bipolar. When you've got a drug addict and they may have indices of being bipolar, until you get them off their drugs and get them sober for a substantial period of time, where the damage to their brain is the brain's healed itself, you can't be really sure if it's the drugs or if you do have a true bipolar. And so it's a real complexity in deciding if this is for us, a drug court case or a mental health court case. And I think for the health service providers, it's very complicated for them to know what direction in treatment. Obviously, sobriety is going to be real important, but then what else?
Okay. All right. Also, I think there's the term out there, CIT, and having that training. What does that stand for?
CIT is crisis intervention training, and it's a way for us to bridge the gap between law enforcement and mental health. It's a way for us to police problems and not just people. If we police the person, they end up in jail, they don't get the treatment they need. If we police what the actual problem is, we can get them the help that they need. One of the biggest tenets of this is treating everybody like they're a family member and saying, what would I do if this was my mother, my father, my sister, or my brother? What can I do? What's the best way to get them the best help they can? And offer the officers several different resources on what am I dealing with? Let me recognize what the issue is. And if I can recognize what the issue is, I can de-escalate the situation and find what the best solution to the problem is. Maybe it's jail, maybe it's not. Maybe it's calling the Georgia Crisis Center, having them send somebody out. Maybe it's bringing them to Ridgeview or bringing them to one of the other healthcare facilities that we have, mental health care facilities. That might be the best first step that we have. So CIT is training our officers to recognize what the issues are and give them the tools to be able to decide, or if they can't decide, call somebody with more knowledge to come and decide what the best course of action is for the particular person. You know, our goal is, as a police officer growing up, I've been doing this for 23 years, I was always told, oh, that house, you know, if we go to that house, those people in there are crazy. Well, that was 23 years ago. We can't police that way anymore. Now it's, well, what's the specific problem and why do we keep going to that house? Let's solve the problem so that house is not that house anymore. Let's get that person the help that they need. And that's the main part of CIT that we're bringing into the Cobb County Police Department.
Okay. All right. My understanding is that this actually originated in Memphis, Tennessee, but that Nami, Georgia, or National Alliance for Mental Illness, they helped bring it to the state of Georgia. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have a fantastic relationship with Nami, among other agencies. You know, we're not psychologists, we're not clinicians, we're police officers, but we have several roles. You know, we tend to be medical personnel at times. We carry tourniquets. I didn't carry a tourniquet when I first started out. I do now, but we have to have some social work experience. We have to be marriage counselors and priests sometimes. We have to do a little bit of everything. We have to be experts in a lot of different fields, or at least realize when we're out of our depth and do need additional help. But Nami has given us so much information. They've actually come to the academy and taught classes just to give our officers some more insight into some of the issues that we're dealing with on a daily basis.
Okay. And Ms. Sanders, you're the president of a local affiliate of Nami, are you not?
Yes, I am. And I'm the CIT liaison for our affiliate. And working with CIT is really my favorite thing to do, because I personally feel indebted to our CIT officers. And I feel like I'm speaking for Nami in general. The fact that these officers are going the extra mile on top of everything else that they're carrying to understand mental health conditions and to serve our loved ones in a more effective way means the world, and we are indebted to them.
And what does Nami do for people who may not have heard of Nami before this evening's program?
Nami is the largest grassroots mental health organization in the nation, and we serve families and individuals with mental health diagnoses by providing education, support, advocacy, and resources. And everything that we do is free, And so we welcome everyone to come. And you know, we're really led by families and individuals with lived experience, and we have a passion to serve those in need. And myself and many others that I know first came to Nami when they were in crises and just trying to figure out what was happening with their loved one. And we stick around because Nami made such a huge difference, and we want to help others along the same road.
And what is that support? You mentioned the word support. What does that form does that take in the case of NAMI? What kind of support do they
We
offer?
have both family support groups and connection recovery support groups. A family support group is a support group for family members of someone with a diagnosis. And then we also have a connection recovery support group, and that's for the person who has the mental illness. And they're led, my husband and I actually lead a group, and then we have the connection recovery support groups are led by those with mental health condition.
Okay, so the ones that have the diagnosis, they lead their own group separate?
Yes, they
Okay.
do. But they have to become certified. They go through extensive training, and then our model is to have two support group facilitators at least in every support group. So there's, you know, accountability and safety and all of that. But it's been found to be very effective.
And so how has NAMI partnered with the CIT effort in Georgia and in Cobb County?
We've had actual clinicians from NAMI come out and teach our officers, which has been fantastic. Like I said, we're experts in a little bit of everything, but they're the pure subject matter experts in the CIT training and how to handle different things, how to recognize the situations that we're going to get into, and they give us the resources directly. They've taught 8 and 16-hour and 24-hour courses for us on their own, just come in with free of charge to give our officers the best education that we can give them while we are developing our own program, and they've been instrumental in helping out with that as well.
All right. Ms. Sanders, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I have had the privilege of working with our police departments in helping to host the training, the 40-hour training, and also in sharing the family perspectives module and teaching the community resource module. And I just find it so rewarding to start on a Monday with these officers who, as one of our instructors often says, are voluntold to be there. And then to see the empathy that they have by the end of the week, and how much they care. And, you know, we are just so privileged in our state to have the CIT training and the officers who are willing to take part of it.
And so can you tell us a lot about that training? What kind of things make up that 40 hours training that gets you certified to be CIT?
The 40-hour training encompasses everything. One of the best parts about the 40-hour training is actually going to a mental health facility and seeing what goes on inside the facility, and you get to see almost all of the disorders that we've talked about throughout the week. We break it down. For me, for law enforcement, the most important thing is to recognize what you're dealing with. Is somebody being non-compliant, or is somebody autistic or have Asperger's, or are they suffering from Alzheimer's and they don't know what you're saying? And we're going to handle that different ways. If it's a non-compliant issue, that may be a use of force issue. If it's not, then it's not a use of force issue. So it's important to do that, but then to see what we've talked about all week and go to a facility and see what's going on in that facility, it's easier for the officers. Officers tend to be visual learners. If they can see what's going on, then they can go further. If they go on the road and they see this, they can say, well, I've seen this before, I know how to react to this now. The other component that's extremely important is de-escalation. There's a way you go up to a combative or non-compliant subject, but that's not the same way you go up to somebody who's suffering from one of these disorders. If you go at them in an aggressive tone or take an aggressive authoritarian tone, they may reply with violence or with anger. If you go and talk to them quietly, ask them questions, you can figure out pretty quickly exactly what the situation is, or as close as you possibly can.
Okay. All right. And with respect to I think the principle of de-escalation, I guess, is that a key component of the CIT process?
Absolutely, that's a huge component of it. If you see in the news, you see a lot of times where officers do react to situations Luckily, we haven't had that in Cobb, but in other areas where they'll approach an autistic child and maybe grab the child or an older Alzheimer's patient. One example that I saw recently was an Alzheimer's patient went into a Walmart, walked out, grabbed a knife, and walked out with a knife. It was still in the package, but walked out and didn't even realize that they weren't paying for it. When the officer came up to the person was old and walking with a cane. Instead of looking at the problem and taking the totality of what was going on, the officer grabbed and slammed the lady to the ground. Probably not the best way to do it. She was moving at a snail's pace. I don't really see that she was much of a threat. It probably would have taken her 5 minutes to walk towards the officer anyway. There's other ways to solve the problem. If the officer would have been properly trained, I believe that situation would have been resolved differently. De-escalation is huge, is a very huge part of the CIT training. And our training in general, just not with CIT. You know, I'm a big guy. I've been doing this for a while. I keep myself fit, but there's a lot of officers out there that are maybe not or maybe don't have the same amount of training with defensive tactics, and they have to go out there. And I can tell you the roughest fight I ever had in my career was I was about 3 years in, came up to a guy that was maybe 130 pounds. He was a roofer, but he didn't have one of those machines that carried the shingles to the top of the roof. He would carry them himself. So while he was small, he was wiry, and it was a fight, and he was tossing me around like a rag doll. And that's when I realized, you know what, maybe if I would have just talked to him a little bit nicer, we wouldn't have gotten to that fight. I would much rather resolve the situation with my shirt not ripped and picking up my gear off the ground after a fight.
Okay. One thing you do hear sometimes from the family members of the person who has a mental health diagnosis is that they're kind of fearful of calling the police because their thought is, well, yes, maybe my loved one is behaving violently towards me, but my fear is if I call the police, then he's going to be shot. So how does CIT help with that dynamic?
CIT, one of the things, I have a 5-year-old autistic child. He's my son. I mean, he's my moon. He's everything. He's just a fantastic human being, and he's only 5 years old. One of the things that I do notice with him is he speaks. He's hard to understand. Sometimes it's gibberish, but there are times when he gets into an episode, well, he'll put his hands on his ears and he just won't listen to anything I'm saying. One of my biggest fears is what happens 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road if an officer comes up to him and says, well, he's just not being compliant. I'm going to grab him, or I'm going to do what I would normally do with a non-compliant combative subject. So that's one of the things I worry about more so, and that's one of the reasons why I'm as involved and as passionate about the CIT program as I am. But we need to train officers and families. Hey, try to talk to your kids. Try to, if they can, try to tell them what to do in a situation when an officer comes up the best way we can. But really, it's going to be more incumbent on the officer to realize what the situation is and try to read it. We can't, unfortunately, right now, have a family member call up and tell our dispatcher, hey, my son has schizophrenia, this, and this, because there's HIPAA rules that we have to follow as well. We can't really transmit that information. So we're looking for other ways around that. One of the ways is word of mouth through officers. We can say, okay, this is my area, I own this area, this is my beat, I'm responsible for this, and I know who's in my neighborhood. So I know when I reply to that or respond to that one house, this is the situation I may walk into. So if the person starts yelling gibberish at me and running down the stairs, they maybe have an episode. They may not be trying to attack me. I don't know. I mean, we still have to have officer safety, but going in there having that previous knowledge will help us out.
Okay. So with this with this CIT training, basically this helps them to be more cognizant and recognize.
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, now, so if someone here is listening that's lives in Cobb County, if they have a loved one, they think they need to call the police, but yet they want to make sure that it's handled appropriately, what should he or she say on the phone to the dispatcher?
Absolutely. Everything you just said, every bit of information they possibly can give will go into the dispatcher and will come out into the officer onto their MDT, which is their mobile data terminal. So when the officer responds, he or she will understand, hey, this is not like the last call I went to. This one's special. There's something else going on here. We eventually are going to put or offer the CIT class to dispatchers as well. They do have a fair amount of training in it, but we want to push that even further and have them come in and take the training as well. Just help everybody out so we get all the information that we could possibly get.
And how many officers do we have in the Cobb PD at present who've done the 40 hours and have completed the CIT course?
There's just under what we have, somewhere between 680 and 700 officers. Every one of our officers has been through a 16-module CIT course. Actually, I shouldn't say that. They have till the end of the month to get through the last module. So they will all have that training. As far as the 40-hour training, That class is offered. It needs to be offered more. We can get usually 5 officers in at a time, and it's only offered a few times a year. That'll take us to like 2030 to get all our officers through it. So we're working directly with the agencies to get more of that training and hosting it at the Cobb County Police Department to get more officers through it. But they are all getting a minimum of 24 hours training, every one of the officers. And as far as I know, we're the only department in the area that has that training right now.
Okay. And I understand that the sheriff's office actually leads a lot of the trainings.
Yeah, there are members of the Sheriff's Department that have a tremendous amount of training as well, and we work in tandem with them.
And then also, didn't like last year or 2 years ago, Governor Deal issue an order directing like the state level law enforcement officials to go through CIT training?
Yes, absolutely. They did, and they're implementing it. When you start talking about a small agency with 20 officers, it's pretty easy to get your whole department through that. When you start talking about 39,000 officers in the state of Georgia, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And I think that they're working on it diligently, but there needs to be more instructions and more classes that are being taught so we can get everybody through the 40-hour class, which is extremely beneficial.
And to be clear, the governor's order was to state officials. It wasn't telling Cobb County, DeKalb County, Fulton
Right.
County, you have to be doing these trainings.
Exactly. It's a directive, and we have to comply with it. The 40-hour course that they are offering is a fantastic course. We just need more instructors and more of the courses out there. But we're taking a step now to implement our own training in anticipation of getting everybody through the full 40-hour course.
Okay. Now, obviously, we talked about how if you call the police officer and dispatch and say, hey, I want to have help, the officer comes out, responds to the situation, and now we're beginning to potentially enter the court system, and that brings in the judge and Mr. Pursley. So how does that work from there? So the person is identified as having a mental health condition, perhaps they're detained. Where does the process go from there?
If a person wants to enter a mental health court, it's a completely voluntary program. We don't force anybody to do the mental health court program. So it's started with the defense attorney. So with counsel of their attorney, they apply with my office. There's an application online, and they apply, fill out the application. I get it, and I make sure that it's legally sufficient. I'm not an expert in mental health court. In mental health, I am in mental health court, but not in mental health. But not in mental health. So, and I can't tell. I never, I'm the prosecutor, so I don't get to talk to the defendant. We send those over to the mental health court staff, and then we have people with the CSB, that's our service provider, and they go out and they talk to them either at the jail or if they're not in custody, they come to the CSB and they talk to them. We gather medical records and mental health records, and then we all meet, the whole team meets, and decide whether or not a person should come into the mental health court, and if so, what we're going to do with them. We have to have what we're looking for is a severe and persistent mental illness that affects their daily life. So we're going after high risk, high needs people in our all of our accountability courts.
So must you have a diagnosis in order to be enrolled in the mental health court, or can that come at a later time?
Ultimately, you have to have a
Yes.
diagnosis, but you don't have to have one at the beginning. I mean, this could be a first episode where you've never been diagnosed, but you will have a diagnosis before you come into,
Yes.
ultimately allowed into the court.
Okay. And so what are the criteria that cause one candidate to be determined to be appropriate for this program and someone else just doesn't quite make the mark? What are the factors that are causing one to go one route and the other candidate to go the other route? I'm sorry, participant, I think you said they were.
Well, first of all, they have to volunteer to do it. We will take some violent offenses in mental health court. A lot of these are domestic incidents. We see a good bit. But we don't take, for example, what we refer to as 7 deadlies. We're not going to take murder, rape, armed robbery, those kind of offenses. Another thing that we have to take into account is the criminal history. Now, we do take people that have criminal histories, but they can kind of come into the court in different ways. If they don't have any kind of felony offense, they can go through the mental health court, and if they're successful at it, they can have their case dismissed, so that will not be on the record. If they do have past criminal offenses, then they can come in sometimes as, for example, a condition of probation. So they'll be on probation while they're in our court, and then when they finish our court, oftentimes they finish out their probation. There's a variety of factors, to answer your question, there's a variety of factors that we look at.
Okay. But again, they have to be voluntary. They can't, no court's going to order them. You must go through mental health court, period.
I think technically and legally a court can, but what we've seen that has the best result, it's a rigorous program. It's demanding. And our best results are people that want to participate. One thing that we take into account too is the victim. There's victim input into every one of these cases. The other thing we look into is if it's been violent, is there a likelihood a person's going to act out violently at the health care provider? Because there aren't deputies and sheriffs and police out where they're receiving their mental health therapy. They're around a lot of other people, many of whom are vulnerable. And we feel like we have a very strong responsibility to the health care providers that the people that come out of our program don't act out violently or commit thefts or do things that are destructive in their programs. We're also looking for the person, what we found out early on is there are people that are criminogenic in their thought processes and their approach to life. They're antisocial people. And they aren't successful in these programs. They don't succeed at drug court. They don't succeed in mental health court. They don't tend to turn up in vet court, but they don't succeed there either. So we've learned we're looking for the person who is not antisocial, but the person has had a mental health disorder that has caused them to act out in a criminal manner. And those people are the most successful.
I would imagine that, and I think you might have mentioned this yourself, Your Honor, about a situation where you have like a parent or a sibling who gets hurt. Like maybe they're sitting around the dinner table, somebody says that something's a trigger, and the person gets upset and they get pushed, and somebody maybe breaks a bone or gets hurt, whatever, and then the ambulance comes out. I mean, is that pretty frequent for you to see in your mental health court experience?
I think we see that. We see more than a broken bone. We see shot and stabbed.
Oh, that is a bit worse.
It's a little more, yeah. It's called aggravated assault because it's aggravated. I mean, we see some violent things. And we've had success with situations that were violent, great success. So we have to be careful who we choose. There's a lot of human and economic social resources put into these courts. The court teams work really hard, and it's labor intensive, economic intensive. The participants and their families work really, really hard. And we have to choose the people, since we have limited resources, we have to choose the people that we believe will benefit the most, be most likely to be successful, and most likely to have a greater benefit. We look to the good of all, if we can.
And one of the nice things about what we do in all of our accountability courts is that it's a team approach. So in mental health court, for example, tomorrow morning
I know,
at 8 o'clock, we'll be in Judge Staley Clark's, well, maybe your jury room, maybe
No,
somewhere
my
close by,
office.
to talk. And so you have a lot of different disciplines that are there around the table. So we have a coordinator who's there. We have a case manager who's there, a judge, a prosecutor, law enforcement, probation. We have community partners and people that help us with people getting jobs and people getting GEDs. And so when you get everybody's input, we have a much greater chance of choosing the right people. I'll say this too, Judge Staley Clark has mentioned several times about how tough it is for the participants. And one of my jobs is to teach or educate defense attorneys and prosecutors in these accountability courts. And it's a little different talking to the defense attorneys as it is talking to the prosecutors. And I emphasize different things to each group. But with prosecutors, you know, I emphasize how tough it is for these folks to get through mental health court. And so all of our courts are split up into phases. And for example, in phase 1 in mental health court, They are drug tested 3 times a week. They go to 8 group counseling sessions, 8 group sessions per week. So 4 days a week, 2 times a day, they're in a group session. They also oftentimes have to do a community-based self-help group, something like AA, NA, if they have a substance abuse problem. They meet with the coordinator and a counselor regularly. So it's a lot of work for the participants to do, but we've found that part of it is keeping them engaged, keeping them, for lack of better words, keeping them busy and giving them some sort of order and structure, because a lot of folks that have mental illness, they fight against having that structure, and if we can give them that structure, that's a big part of it as well. And as you can, just from that list, and there's a lot more to it than that even, it takes up a lot of their time, even in the beginning and all through the whole court.
Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, it's very interesting. You start out with people that are really very, as a compassionate person, it's often pathetic. It's sad. People that can't get themselves up in the morning. People that have been shut up in rooms most of their life. Real tragic things. And then 2 years later, they're graduating, and you wouldn't believe the difference. It's not 180 degrees. It's 2 billion degrees difference. I mean, there are folks that if you're in the grocery store and you're next to them, you're just thinking that's a neighbor. And they have homes, they have jobs, or they're in school, or if they're disabled, they're doing community service. They are sober. They're reunited with their families. We had graduation last week, and not only does it lift your spirits to have a graduation like that, but more importantly, you see real lives that were desperate become real people that are leading decent lives. It's a remarkable thing.
Well, and you mentioned the graduation ceremony. How long does the class last or the program last that they go through as an individual participant?
It's a minimum of 24 months. That's if you do it right. But some folks take a while to do it right. So it might be 2.5 years. It might be 3 years. We may be holding their hands a bit. And we do. Right now we've got an individual who's come in who won't quit smoking marijuana. And he's sitting in jail right now. And we're trying to figure out how to get him to quit smoking marijuana and have him out of jail so he can start his therapy and his treatment. And like, I hate to say this, but I told one of our participants, because he was doing this to me, and I said, well, Mr. So-and-so, if you think this is a game, you need to understand I'm the person who's going to win, not you. And about a month later, he wasn't doing anything he shouldn't have been doing anymore. He just, once it gets to the point that they understand, then they do, well, I'm just going to do this because I have to. And then, do you think it's after about 6 months, you start to see the genuine, authentic, real person who wants to do this because they're sober. And they start to see the benefit of a better life. And they want to do it. And they grasp it.
That's one of the great things about my job. As prosecutors, if you think about it, prosecutors only see the failures. You see somebody who's committed a crime and you're trying them and they're going to prison. Or you put them on probation and they failed at probation and you're trying to revoke their probation and send them to prison. If they're successful, as a prosecutor, we don't see them. We never see them again. So we, out of sight, out of mind. So we never see those successes. With my job in particular, I do get to see the successes. So I get to see these graduation ceremonies where I've seen a judge hugging a defendant who's graduated from one of our accountability courts. And you see these people who you thought, I don't know if she's going to make it through this program. And we had one in particular that she got out, and as soon as she got out, she started using drugs again. I think within a few days of getting out of our jail, we put her back in. And our sheriff is very supportive of these programs, and he has a work release program where they're in jail at night, and during the day they go and they work. And we were able to put her into work release, and we're drug testing her three or more times a week, and I think it was about 6 months later, she was a completely different person.
And we got her through her grandmother dying and a lot of other tragedies in her family without her using, which she said was she couldn't believe that she had been able to do that. And she attributed it to our program, but I attribute it to the skills that she learned, and I attribute it to her.
Well, I think both of you had referenced the program like Narcotics Anonymous or AA, and of course, in those programs, there's a concept of a sponsor. Is there a similar concept like within mental health court, like where, hey, it's 9 o'clock at night, I'm having a weak moment, I need to talk to somebody right now? Is there such a thing as that, or?
They have sponsors, and we require, some of our folks don't have drug or alcohol addiction. That's a minority, true. But you can't say across the board they're addicts. It's not true. But the ones that are required to be in some kind of a community self-help group, and they're required to have a sponsor. And their sponsor has to call in every week to us and give us an update on them. And so they have a sponsor, and they're mandated to have a sponsor. And if they don't get a sponsor, I give them okay, well, you got to go get a sponsor. I want to see a sponsor in 3 days. I can't do that. Oh, yes, you can. You go do it. This will work. I know it will.
I'll tell you, we also have in mental health court a phenomenal sheriff's deputy that helps us, and a phenomenal community supervision officer who helps us, and they call them. The participants will call that deputy or call that community supervision officer and tell them, hey, I'm having this problem or that problem. And I'm talking day or night. I mean, they're very dedicated.
And also our staff, the coordinator and the case manager are available to them all the time. And at the Community Services Board, the people that are assigned we have one liaison who's assigned to our court, and she is always there for them. And they're aggressively working on proper housing. They're aggressively working on getting these people in the right therapy, in the right, there are all kinds of different setups for getting therapy. It depends on what you need. Like therapy for some people needs to be gender specific. You need to be with women or men. They're aggressively placing them in the right place. There are a lot of hands-on people with them, and then they see me once a week.
And
That's not good.
I think you mentioned like the therapies that the individuals or participants are sent to. Are these therapies like, are they support groups kind of like what Nami offers? Or are these actually ones led by psychiatrists or?
Yes. Apart from the community-based self-help like NA or AA, what they get at the CSB is mental health therapy, which is available to anyone in our community, I think on a sliding scale based on your economics. Anybody can go there. You don't have to be in our program to go out to the Community Service Board and get mental health care. And it's the same quality and the same level. They have a psychiatrist, they have lots of psychologists, and they have therapists. And part of the intake and the analysis is, what does this person, our participant, need? And then they pick, it can be group treatment, it can be individual therapy, it may be that you need more than anything social skills. We were talking about autism and other people like that. Often what they need are peer communities, to be with other people like them, but to go do things like maybe go bowling or go to the movies, which they've never had a chance to do in their lives. So it's very individual, tailored, specific, but it's also evidence and science-based. Okay.
Now, in that same vein, Your Honor, I mean, I think there's also opportunities called clubhouses, I believe, that are possible in the mental health arena. Could some of you maybe speak to the clubhouses and what's the general concept behind a clubhouse and how it operates?
There are actually 300 clubhouses in 33 different countries right now. Unfortunately, Atlanta does not have one yet, but clubhouses are run by individuals with mental health conditions who become members and professional staff. And they're incredible opportunities for people with mental health conditions to have community, to have structure and order to their day. They often offer job skills training and have staff that will help make doctor's appointments, all those kinds of things. They will actually plan the menus and go do the shopping and prepare the food. And it's a wonderful opportunity for people to actually enter into community and recover, because recovery doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so very often when people become ill with a mental illness, they become isolated as well. And that is not helpful to the recovery. So we are hopeful to see a clubhouse come into existence here in Atlanta. We have a few people who are working on that right now. It's in its infant stages, but Nami Northside is very excited about the potential of this. And every year we have our Nami Walk. It's our biggest fundraiser of the year, and we have pledged the funds that we will raise this year from our Nami Walk to give to this clubhouse initiative, in hopes that they will be able to get it off the ground, because we fully believe in it and know that it will serve people well.
And with the clubhouse, do they actually live at the place, or is it just they go during the daytime and do things?
Typically, no. There are some clubhouses that have housing, but I don't think that there are a whole lot of them. Ours would not be something that would start out with housing availability. It's something that they would come to every day, and really give them a reason to get out of bed, and have a purpose for their life and a structure, and help them get their feet off the ground. So
Is this the kind of thing you think would partner with the mental health court like Her Honor talked about and Mr. Percy talked about? See that kind of interfacing well together?
I do, because there's so many opportunities for people to come and to volunteer, and to gain job skills training, and that's really one of the biggest problems for people who have mental illnesses, is that they are unemployed, and they often need a lot of training and a lot of structure, and so I think that it could be a good partnership.
Speaking of the employment piece, it's interesting. We partner with Cobb Works in the mental health court and the drug courts, and 65% of our participants find employment. It's a very high percentage. People with mental illness that are functioning, if they can get other pieces of their life sorted out, transportation, housing, proper medication, some therapy, can get to work. And I believe that work is a huge component of mental wellness, and we're real pleased with our success rate.
What are sort of the things that a person who's a participant in the program, like Cobb Works or this employment training, what does the training look like that's maybe different than maybe a quote unquote regular person? I guess what's the different thing they're teaching and they're learning? What skills are they trying to impart to them that maybe someone else who doesn't have a diagnosis might be not needing to learn?
Well, this is a little counterintuitive. I think the difference is we don't treat them differently. We just say, get up and go. I can't get there on time. Well, do you have a phone? Are you the only person on the planet who doesn't have a phone? Well, yes, I got a phone. Well, then use the alarm. This is not difficult. And then they know that I'm not going to accept no, because that's my function. My function is to be the person who says, no, we can do this. I know we can do this. I know they're looking at me saying, the we part of you is not, you're not doing this. But I think maybe, because when you asked me, I thought, what is the answer to that? And my brain goes, we don't treat them different. We don't treat them differently at all. We treat them like competent human beings, because that's what we have as their aspirational goal, and it's what they can do.
Okay.
We have, along those lines, we have, one of our requirements is they have to be working, if they don't have a GED, they have to be working on a GED. In the criminal justice system in general, the correlation between people that don't have a GED and that commit crimes is pretty high. And so it's one of the requirements in all of our courts that they have to at least try to get their GED. Some of them perhaps aren't going to be successful, but we never know until they try. And so Her Honor has pushed some of them in a good way to work on that GED, and some of them who never thought in a million years that they could do it have been successful in doing that. And then it's a cumulative effect. They get a GED, that gives them some more self-confidence, and then they get a job. They may get a better job because they have that GED, and I agree, work is a huge part of their recovery and
What
their
about the-
continued recovery.
Well, what about the housing piece? I hear that a lot of times there's a struggle for housing in this particular arena because either they can't live with their family members because the family members don't want them there, or vice versa, they don't want to be with their families. So then they're either couch surfing or doing something else. What are the programs and tools out there to help them with that issue? Because obviously, got a diagnosis and as well as trying to find housing.
Housing is horrible. I would say it is our biggest challenge, it's a bigger challenge than sobriety very often. Because if we can get the other pieces in place with the persistent drug screening and that they know we're going to do something about use, sobriety can be maintained. Housing is a terrible struggle. Even if they're staying with family may be toxic. Family may not be a good, healthy place for our participants to be. The CSB is where we go, and they are tied into vouchers and different places that are available. There's an inadequate amount. Sometimes you have to have a drug use before you can get into housing. Well, what if we have one of our mentally ill people who's not a drug user? They can't get in. And marijuana doesn't count, which I think is, well, I won't say. I think it's absurd. That's what I think of it. Housing is just a real struggle. The governor has been a big proponent of accountability courts, and he's making a push, but he's going to leave. We'll have a new governor soon. We'll have to see what that governor's attitude is going to be. But there's a push afoot right now to do something about housing, but it's in its infancy. What do you say, John?
I agree with you 100%. When you were asking the question, I was thinking that's the hardest piece of the puzzle for us. We've got, and some of the rules are so bizarre for getting into some of the programs. Some of them, if you come straight out of jail, you're not considered homeless because you've been in jail. So you can't get into certain housing because you're not homeless. And literally, you have to sleep on the street for 24 hours before they'll consider you homeless. And so it's extraordinarily hard for us to
And
find.
some of them you have to have used recently to get into housing. Our people, we get sober.
Right.
So then they're precluded. And what are you going to do? Say, go use real quick? I
Right.
don't think so. We wouldn't do that.
Right. Well, Ms. Sanders, can you share us sort of like you obviously have one of the roles that you wear here is you're a parent of someone with a diagnosis, or I guess Lieutenant, you mentioned an autistic son. I mean, what are the challenges that you face as the parent? I mean, of someone who has a mental health diagnosis in dealing with the outside world, with family, coworkers. What are the struggles that you have?
Well, if I could touch on the housing real quick before we move on, as a family member, we actually have two children who struggle, and oftentimes the families want to serve that person who has an illness, and they want to care for them and do everything that they can, but oftentimes the person doesn't want to receive that help. And so that puts the family in a very difficult situation. I know in our situation, our son who has autism required a lot of therapy, private school, that kind of thing. And so our funds were already drained when our other child then became ill in college. And so I think what families face is a drain in their funds. I mean, no more retirement, no more savings, because as a family member, you're going to do everything you possibly can to provide care for your child. And eventually you run out of money. And so when you have a 30-year-old child who needs housing, often you can't provide it. And so that is the most helpless, anguishing feeling in the world. And to speak to some of the voucher programs, what we have found is that even if someone does get a voucher, often the housing that's provided is not safe and not safe for anybody, let alone someone who's suffering from a mental illness. So it is a crisis in our society that we've got to find a way to fix. So I know, I'm sorry I didn't answer your other question.
No, that's okay.
Do you want to ask me one more time?
No, I was just asking kind of what your experience is as a parent, because I would imagine it's very unique. It's one thing because you're living that life all the time. And what's it like in terms of people who are coworkers or family or friends, and how they treat you and how they look upon the situation, and what support they provide, if any?
Well, we in Nami, we always say you can't know what you didn't know. And in our situation, for my husband and I, we knew nothing of a serious mental illness until it hit our family. And so it's been a learning process for us over the last 10 years, and the same for our friends, because nobody wants to join the NAMI club. It's not a club that you just think, wow, someday I hope I get to join that one. We're here because we need to be here. And I find it very important to give grace and understanding to those around us who love us and care as they're beginning to understand what's going on in our own family. It is very isolating and very confusing as you're traveling this road of mental illness and trying to learn how to navigate the mental health system and to survive in your new normal. And again, I think that there's people on both ends of the spectrum. There's people who are very understanding and who have been educated and who realize that mental illness is an illness, just like diabetes or anything else. And there's people who have not yet been educated and understand that it truly is an illness and not something that the person can help. So we're fortunate to be surrounded by, good friends and family members who have a good understanding and are supportive.
Okay. All right. Does anyone add anything to that?
A couple of things. When my son was born, he was, I say normal, I hate using the word normal because what is normal? But he was progressing, and then one day all the words he knew stopped coming out. And you try to make excuses for it. Oh, he'll catch up. And then you get the diagnosis, and you tell your family. And I can say that I've been blessed with a family who was supportive from day one. One of the things I do notice is I don't see him as different. He's my son. But when I take him to places, I could wait online at a Kroger, and the cashier will try to talk to him, and he just stares back. And the cashier will keep saying over and over again, and you want to say, hey, lady, he's not going to answer you. He's autistic, but you also don't want to label him in that way. So everyone who I've ever come in contact with has been very accepting of him, and they understand what his condition is. My son's a lot younger than your son, so I don't know what the future holds. I think that's the hardest part for me is this is how he is now. He's great. He's sweet. He's demonstrative. He wants to be in your arms. He wants group hugs. He loves when people group hug. He likes that. What happens down the road if he's not? What is the housing going to be like? What, the future, I don't know what the future is. And I haven't found a clinician or a therapist who could tell me because they don't have a crystal ball, so they don't know. But speaking to what you said, occupational therapy, there's all types of therapy that we're putting him through. And he's gaining ground, but they always tell you be careful because you don't know when it's going to stop. He may regress. You just have no idea. So it's difficult in that matter.
Well, and Your Honor?
I wanted to add something that's tangential, but it's something that I've seen in court and even outside of mental health court. a lot of people that come through the court system have mental health disorders. And in order to take a guilty plea or handle any kind of case, you have to make sure that they're competent to enter the plea. And so one of the questions is, have you had a mental health, psychiatric treatment or been in a mental health care provider? And people will hold their head down. And I'll say, it's okay. We talk about that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just who you are. And as soon as you say that, 9 times out of 10, the person's whole attitude changes. They'll hold themselves up. They'll look you in the eye. They'll have a conversation. They'll tell you what the diagnosis is. They'll tell you what the meds are. They'll answer all the questions about, do you know where you are? Do you know what you're doing? As soon as the person who's talking to a person with a mental health diagnosis acts like, well, this is normal. This is fine. They find their place, and it's a very healthy thing that you see. It makes me feel good to see a person be able to be comfortable enough to do their business in a competent way. And I think just by us talking about it, and I agree with you about the ignorance component, by recognizing this as part of humanity, the human condition, and reaching out to others on a human level, just makes things so much better for accomplishing things.
I think Your Honor makes a great point. I mean, obviously, if someone was out there and they had, diabetes, they wouldn't think twice about saying that. I have diabetes, I get insulin, blah, 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 blah. But you say, hey, I'm bipolar, I'm schizophrenic. They're like, no, no one's going to be saying that. So I think your point is that you just got to talk about it, put it out there, and people might be, more understanding. It kind of takes the stigma away from that topic.
I agree.
So that's great. Well, now one of the things too, I guess, about the parents too in this situation they have with their loved ones is, of course, I think a lot of times I hear parents say, hey, I want my kid to do this, and this as when they get older and be this thing or that thing. How do you as parents work with those expectations, those goals? Because obviously you have certain thoughts about what your kids are going to do in their future. How do you work with those things in terms of the diagnoses and their life journeys?
My only hope is that my son's happy. When I see a smile on his face, nothing else matters. So whatever he does, whatever stage in life he is, I'm his guardian. I'm going to take care of him and give him whatever he needs. Judge, you brought up a great point. We don't treat him any differently. If he acts bad, there's discipline involved, not physical, but there's discipline involved. He loves his iPad. That's the worst thing in the world you could ever do is take his iPad away. But he needs that discipline. If you don't give it to him, he won't understand. I have a 15-year-old as well, and the 15-year-old has taken such a great role in the 5-year-old's upbringing as well. He's always helping out. Hey, can I get you something? Do you want juice? And he'll say, yes. He goes, no, you have to ask for it. I want juice. And we've taught him sign language as well to help him speak a little bit more. But to answer your question, my only goal is for him to be happy, and we will stay there and stand behind him for whatever he needs for as long as he needs. If he's living in the house when he's, God willing, I live long enough and he's 40, he's going to live in the house. I'm going to have my 40-year-old kid with me. And that's what I've decided. We're going to get him all the help we can to make him go as far as he can, but we can't push him past what he's capable of.
Okay. Ms. Sanders, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I do think that the family members' shattered expectations or dreams for their child who becomes suddenly ill is a very real thing. And I think it's important, for us to remember that person is still in there. They are still the same person, and they are not defined by their illness. And that doesn't mean that they're going to get back to who they were before or to being able to do the same things. But there is hope for recovery. And the thing that I tell people the most is never give up hope. Because your daughter is still your daughter. She's still that same person inside. And so we need to support them, love them, provide everything that we can to help them, and then realize that recovery is relative. And so should they get to a point to where they are functioning, hopefully able to work, to provide for themselves, that can be a really great victory in somebody's life. And so I really think that it is, it's a real thought process that family members have to go through to realize that it's not this person's fault, and the outcome of their life may be different, but that doesn't mean it's going to be bad. And they're still your family member.
Okay. Well, in that same vein, I guess we're probably getting toward the end of our program. So what I'd like to do is I would love to hear from each of our panelists and kind of leave our audience members with some final thoughts about this particular topic of mental health and mental health awareness, and maybe leave them with a hopeful note. We want to make sure that our audience members know that I think, as Ms. Sanders pointed out, this is not all gloom and doom. There's certainly some hope and there's positive outcomes, and I think Your Honors touched upon those as well in the program. So if you could just each one, take a couple of minutes and just kind of share that with our audience, and we'll kind of go across the dais here, starting with Your Honor, and kind of work our way across.
I'd like to follow up with what you were just talking about, and families' altered or crushed hopes. You have situations where people have, we deal with drug addiction too, and you have drug addicts who almost die and then they end up in wheelchairs or they're mentally disabled. There are a lot of conditions where these things happen. But every human life has value, and it has potential, and to love and be loved is in my opinion, a gift from God and a wonderful thing. And I think the thing to be careful of is because we are, and I expect in every family there's someone that's not going to meet the same potential, the optimal potential that you hope for in a human being, that you don't dismiss their capacity to blossom and bloom and grow and be something extraordinary within their capability, and to always have, and it's got to be hard. It's got to be wearing. I have a grandson who's autistic, and I wonder these same things and how to talk to my son and my daughter-in-law without sounding judgmental or demanding or having unrealistic expectations, or the alternative as a grandmother is to keep my mouth shut and act like I'm not tied into my grandson properly. It's a real balancing act on me, trying to be sensitive to them, but I know Ryan's going to achieve special things because he's a special person. So I think to keep in our heart the capacity of people, and that we all have to help one another, and of every successful person, to whatever degree they're successful, other people help them, and we have to be part of that helping unit.
Great. Thank you, Your Honor. Appreciate it. Lieutenant Leo?
So I have to follow that? That's fantastic. No, I can tell you what, as a police officer, again, for 23 years, everything's rush, rush, rush. And almost in a way, having my son was a blessing because it has taught me patience and patience and patience. And that has carried on in every aspect of my life. I'm far more patient. I'm still type A, but maybe just like a little bit less, somewhere between A and a B now. I know this is off topic. I drive slower. Everything I do is just geared towards, hey, enjoy life, enjoy the second you have right now, enjoy the next second you have. And my dad used to always say, enjoy every day like it's your last, because one day it will be. And that's how I kind of look at it. Every second I have with my son is a gift. It's a gift from God, and I get to enjoy his smile when I get in and him jumping on me, whether I want him to or not. That's a fantastic gift. But it's also helped me with the CIT program, realizing that these folks need patience, and they need understanding. And that's what I would like to leave people with is be patient, be understanding. The fact that you may have all your mental capacities and everything is also truly a gift. Use some of that to help along somebody who doesn't have the same capacity or ability to achieve what you've achieved, and be the best person you can be and achieve as much as you possibly can, because you do have the gift to be able to do that.
Thank you. Ms. Sanders?
Well, I would echo what Your Honor also said, that every human life has value, regardless of the circumstances. And I have a personal belief that everything happens for a purpose. And, I can see the purpose in both of my children's lives that struggle, who are incredibly empathetic and merciful, and who are able to see the pain in other people's lives and to help them in that kind of a capacity. And so I would say, if your loved one is faced with a mental health condition, don't think that that is, a death sentence or the end of life as you knew it. There's a reason, there's another purpose, and we need to be advocates and cheerleaders for these people, and to support them in their journey.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Mr. Persley?
I would like for you to edit the program so that what they said comes last, and I don't have to have the last word. So if y'all could do that, that would be fantastic.
That'll be a Cobb TV question, not me. I'm afraid.
Okay, very good. I have somebody that's very close to my family that was recently diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and you hear jokes sometimes about, oh, my OCD is acting up or whatever, but in this particular young man's life, it was a very trying time for him, and it was a trying time for his parents. And there were organizations I know for a fact in his life, like Nami, that helped find places. I know his parents had trouble finding what was going on. Who do you go to? Do you open up the yellow pages and just start looking? Do you Google and then you find somebody that you've never heard of before or whatever. And this is, I don't want to vault us into a new topic, but we didn't really talk about any kind of medications much tonight. But in his case, this young man's case, some medications really made a difference in his life, and there's a stigma to that. In addition to the mental illness, there's a stigma to being on medication for a mental illness. And I told him, this is not changing you into a different person. It's making you the person that you were before this hits you. And with him, I refer to it sometimes as a brain illness. Sometimes even the term mental illness, and we use that term because we don't want it to have a stigma. But even that sometimes has some sort of stigma to it. Whereas it's something that's wrong with his brain, which is what's causing this. It's switches, receptors, whatever it is in his brain that's causing this. And this medication helps him be more like his old self. And so I want to say thank you to organizations like Nami. I want to say thank you to organizations that involve CIT training, because just in my time in prosecution, I've seen a huge difference in the way that law enforcement deals with folks with mental illness. And thank you, Judge Staley Clark, for allowing me to do what I do, but also for the things that she does for mental health court, because it's a volunteer thing for her. She volunteers her time to do that. So.
All right, well, wonderful. Well, that sounds like a nice note to end things on. And so I want to thank our audience members, as well as those on TV, Cobb TV, and as well as the internet who've been watching us tonight, and certainly thank our dynamic panelists. We're very fortunate to have such dedicated public servants and advocates in the community, and I want to thank specifically Judge Mary Staley Clark, Lieutenant Anthony Leo, Beth Sanders, and Assistant District Attorney John Persley, and of course Cobb TV and their wonderful help tonight. It's been a phenomenal program, and I really appreciate each one of you giving your time and all the good work you do each and every day in the cause of mental health awareness. So without further ado, I'll turn this over to Glenn.
Again, we want to thank you, Joel, and we do want to thank our distinguished panel, not only for your participation tonight, but your obvious dedication and heart for others and our community. You're going beyond what your job is, and we appreciate that. I also want to thank our Cobb Board of Commissioners, our audience live and on TV, and we look forward as the Neighborhood Safety Commission and the Community Awareness Committee to have further forums and which you can find on our website. Thanks again, and good night.